Okay, welcome everyone to our Chapter 5 Human Anatomy and Physiology Review lecture presentation. So, bear with me through this lecture. This chapter is kind of long and tedious. There's a lot of information, and it's very generalized information, so I feel like that makes it a little bit more difficult to grasp. But I'm going to try my best to explain it to you in as simple terms as I can, since this isn't an anatomy class, it's a phlebotomy class. Okay, so I'm going to start this. So why do you think anatomy and physiology would be important for phlebotomists to know? So basically, the reason that it's not a requirement to know your anatomy and physiology, the basics of it, but it is very useful to us as phlebotomists because it helps us understand the nature of different disorders or symptoms that patients that come in might be having. And it also helps us understand the rationale for the lab tests that are associated with those disorders or symptoms. So like I said, with the example of somebody that comes into the ER with a fever of unknown origin and they prescribe a CBC and a lactic acid on them. It might be a good idea. We know as phlebotomists that a lot of times with a fever of unknown origin, it could indicate sepsis or an infection of some kind. So it's important that maybe we grab an extra set of cultures or something like that. And that will save the patient an extra poke in the future if the doctor may have missed it or forgot to order it, something like that. So while it's not necessary, your best phlebotomist will have a basic understanding of anatomy and physiology in order to catch things. I think that's all. Okay, next. All right, so your human body consists of more than 30 trillion cells, 206 bones, 700 muscles, about 5 liters of blood, and about 25 miles of blood vessels. That's pretty crazy to think that we have 25 miles of blood vessels inside of us. Nuts. So there are two terms, anatomy and physiology, and a lot of times people struggle with differentiating these two terms. Anatomy is simply the structural composition of your body, so the structures within your body. The physiology is the function of those structures. Okay, so some basic things you need to know about anatomy is your anatomic position, which is standing erect with the arms at your sides and your eyes and palms facing forward. I believe there's a picture in your book. So page 119 in your book, it's showing you the different planes of the body, which we'll talk about in a second here. That gentleman that's standing there is in an anatomic position, okay? Supine would be laying horizontal on the back with your face up. Prone would be laying face down. If you're referring to the hand, it would be your palm facing down. These are just, there's nothing more I can explain about. These are just terms that you're going to need to know. Positions you'll need to know. Same with your body planes. So your frontal, or they call it the coronal plane. So I always think of it as the coronal plane because I think of it as like a crown on your head. It kind of sits where a crown would sit. So your frontal or coronal plane, it divides your body into front and back portions. Then your sagittal plane. So there's two different terms that include sagittal. There's sagittal and there's mid-sagittal. The sagittal plane divides your body into right and left portions, but they don't have to be equal portions. The mid-sagittal divides your body into equal right and left portions. So it's a vertical line that divides your body into equal right and left portions. Your transverse or horizontal plane, this cuts the body or divides the body into upper and lower portions horizontally. So your frontal and sagittal planes are vertical divisions, and your transverse plane is a horizontal division. Okay. So So here are some directional terms. There's a really good table that you can take a look at on page 119, table 5.1. These are common paired directional terms. So a directional term basically describes the relationship of one part of your body with respect to the rest of your body. So let's see. Your wrist is distal to your elbow. Your head is superior to your shoulder. So inferior would be below, posterior would be behind, anterior would be in front, superior would be above. Medial would be towards the middle of the body, and then lateral would be towards the outside of the body, so like the center. Like when I think of medial, I think of like towards my heart, and lateral would be away from it. So these are just kind of directional terms. Like I said, that table is a really good table to take a look at to get a good feel of your directional terms. I think that's what I'm going to say on that. Okay, and then we have your body cavities. So body cavities are just basically hollow spaces within your body that house certain organs. So your cranial cavity houses the brain, and your spinal cavity houses the spinal cord. Together, the cranial and spinal cavity are considered the dorsal cavity because it's on the back side of you. Your thoracic, pelvic, and abdominal cavities all together are considered your ventral cavity and the front side of you. So your thoracic holds your heart and your lungs. Your pelvic holds your urinary and like reproductive type organs. And then your abdominal cavity holds all of your digestive organs. I do want to point out the diaphragm. This is a muscle that basically just separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. It's very important for respiration and breathing and all sorts of different things, but we're not going to get into that. I just want you guys to know that it is a muscle, a large muscle that separates your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. Okay, so homeostasis, it's a big word that basically just means your body is balanced. It's a state of equilibrium or balance in the body's internal environment. So your body is constantly striving to maintain the state of homeostasis or balance between all of the systems within your body, and it's maintained by feedback and regulation, which we're not going to get into like in depth, but just know that your body wants to stay in that state of equilibrium, and when it's not, it does some funky things and trying to get itself back to that equilibrium state. Okay, so your metabolism is the sum of all physical and chemical reactions needed to sustain life. So any reaction that's going on inside of your body is part of your metabolism. And then there's catabolism and anabolism. I'm probably not going to ask you guys like to differentiate between the two of them, but I'm going to go over it just because I think it's important. Catabolism is basically a destructive process. So complex substances are broken down into simple substances. And then anabolism is the creation of something. So it's a constructive process. So the body converts simple compounds into complex substances. So catabolism is a breakdown of complex substances catabolism is a breakdown of complex substances into simple substances, and anabolism is the opposite. So an example of catabolism would be the conversion of carbs into glucose, and then the subsequent breakdown of glucose into energy. Anabolism would be the creation of hormones from simple substances in the bloodstream. Okay, so chemicals are the basic building blocks of everything. All living matter starts from chemicals. Those chemicals then assemble to form molecules. The molecules then combine to form organelles and cells. And so a cell is the basic structural unit of all life. So cells can combine then to form tissues. Tissues combine to form organs. organs combine to form organ systems, etc., etc. So you can see how it all starts from chemicals: water, salts, sugars, fats, and proteins. And then it builds and builds and builds and builds by combining until you have a human body. Or not just a human body. I mean, any living thing starts from chemicals and cells. Okay, so cells, I want to say that we already talked about how there's trillions in the body. They're responsible for all the activities that occur in your body. And then I'm going to go briefly over types, not necessarily types of cells, but the structures of cells. But don't worry too much about this. I'm not going to test you on the structure of cells because I just feel like that would be rude. So there are many different categories of cells. Each category performs different specialized functions, but every cell, regardless of the category it's in or the function, or its function, has the same basic structural components. So one of those structural components is the chromosomes, which are long strands of DNA organized into units called genes. Blah, 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 blah. Just know that they're basically the cell's DNA. Organelles are specialized structures within the cytoplasm. Surface organelles, structures that project from certain cells. Flagellum, that's a whip-like extension found on sperm. It helps it swim to its destination. So on page 122 in your book, table 5.2 gives you a complete list of cell components and the functions. You can take a glance at that. But like I said, I'm not gonna put anything about the structural components on your exam. One thing I do want to say is that almost all cells have a nucleus, except red blood cells. So that's kind of important. Your red blood cells do not have a nucleus. And the nucleus, for those of you who haven't taken cell biology or general bio, the nucleus is basically like the brain of the cell. It's the command center of the cell. It tells the cell what to do, when, and how. So here's a picture of the cell. So here's the nucleus, which is basically like the brain of the cell. Okay, so then, like I said, cells can combine to form tissues. So groups of similar cells that work together to perform a special function. There's 4 basic types of tissues. There's connective tissue, so that supports and connects all parts of your body. It includes adipose, which is fat, cartilage, bone, and blood. So your blood is actually a form of connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is another type. This covers and protects the body and lines organs, vessels, and cavities. Your muscles are another type of tissue. These contract to produce movement. And then nerves, which transmit electrical impulses and carries them basically to your nervous system to interpret certain stimuli, which we'll get into further in this chapter. So organs, your book really does not go much into depth on this because it goes more into depth on each different organ system. So your tissues combine to form organs, and these are structures composed of tissues that function together for a common purpose. So obviously organs some examples could be your liver, kidney, heart, lungs, skin, bladder, etc., etc. You know your organs. One thing that I do want to mention is that your skin is actually an organ. As strange as that sounds, your skin is the largest organ in your body, and that's of particular importance to us because we are puncturing it. We're poking through the skin. We're puncturing this organ in order to gain access to a vein. So just keep that in mind, that your skin is your largest organ in your body. Okay, so we're going to start getting into body systems. Your integumentary system, your skin, is the first system we're going to talk about. So your skin protects your body from bacterial invasion, dehydration, the sun's rays. I mean, the main function of your skin is protection. It protects your internal organs and internal systems. So that the skin as an organ is mainly for protection. But it also regulates your body temperature. It eliminates some of your waste through sweat. And then it receives environmental stimuli such as heat, cold, touch, pain. So like I said, it's a protective, its main function is a protective function. So if it is able to receive environmental stimuli like heat, you put your hand on a hot pan that was just on the stove, it's gonna take that stimuli to your central nervous system and say, ooh, ow, that's hot. I'm going to take my hand off of it so that you don't burn yourself really bad. It also manufactures vitamin D from sunlight, which is a vitamin that you need in your body, so we definitely want that. I think we're going to go into the structures next. Yes. Okay, so the structures included in your integumentary system is not just your skin. It's also your exocrine glands, which are like oil and sweat glands. These help lubricate the skin and they keep it from drying and cracking. Your hair is a part of your integumentary system. That's also for protection or sensory adaptation. So if something, a bug lands on your skin and it tickles the hair on your skin, that's a sense that you can swat at the bug and say, oh, there's something on me I don't want on me. Your nails, those are to protect your fingers and toes. They also help you grasp objects. And then your blood vessels, nerves, and sensory organs within the skin. Obviously, your blood vessels are very important for transporting oxygen to the tissues of your body in your blood. Your nerves are important for sensory stimuli. If you're in pain, if something is cutting into your arm, you don't want to just allow it to happen because you could bleed out. So that pain stimuli in your nerves that gives you the it goes straight to your central nervous system and says, hey buddy, that hurts, that's gonna cause you some issues if you don't get away from it, and it tells you to pull your arm away. And sensory organs within the skin. So here's a cross section of the skin. I'm going to come back to this because we're going to talk about the layers of your skin. So this is your epidermis, your dermis, and your subcutaneous layer. We're going to go into more depth on the layers of your skin. But I do want to make a note here. In the blue box it says aging causes thinning of the epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous layer. This makes the skin more translucent and fragile and leaves the blood vessels less protected. So as a result of this, the elderly bruise more easily. So as you age, your skin thins. And with the thinning of that blood, your blood vessels are less protected. So you bruise more easily. Okay, so here we're going to get into your skin layers. I was going to find a picture of the cell type, but I forgot to. Oh well. Okay, so your epidermis is your outermost and thinnest layer. It's made up of stratified squamous epithelial cells. This sounds really confusing, but basically stratified just means there's multiple layers of cells. Squamous is just the shape. It's a descriptive word for the type of shape that it is. So there's such thing as like a stratified cuboidal cell. There's stratified columnar. So like cuboidal, you think of a cube shape. Columnar, you think of like a column or like a rectangular shape. Squamous is basically just like an irregular shape. It's more flat. I really wish I would have found a picture, but don't let that confuse you. It's just the type of cells that the epidermis is made out of. It's avascular, so there's no blood or lymph vessels supplying anything to it. And the only living cells are in its deepest layer, known as the stratum germativum. So it's avascular, so if there's no blood getting to it, there's no oxygen getting to it, so it means it's the top layers of the epidermis are actually dead cells. And the deepest layer, the stratum germativum, it actually gets, I don't think it shows it on here, does it? Oh, right here. Okay. So this layer of cells right here, it gets blood supply from these little capillary beds. And then all of these cells in the higher portions of the epidermis are dead skin cells. Okay, so it also, sorry, ignore that. It also produces your skin pigment, melanin, and it is nourished by diffusion of nutrients from the dermis. Alrighty, so the next layer is your dermis. It is your inner layer of skin. It's also known as the corium or true skin. It's a lot thicker than your epidermis. So if we go back here, we can see this is how thick your epidermis is. This is how thick your dermis is. So it's much thicker. And look at all the stuff it contains. So we're gonna go through that. It's composed of elastic and fibrous connective tissue. It contains blood and lymph vessels, sebaceous and sudiferous glands. So that's just oil and sweat glands, and hair follicles. So we go back here. We see this is your hair follicle. This, I think, is a sweat gland. Yep. Then these kind of attached, or part of almost the hair follicle, is your oil or sudiferous, or sebaceous, rather, glands. And then we have got your touch receptors here. So this is a sensory receptor that senses touch or pressure. Okay, so then you've got your subcutaneous level or layer, which is below the dermis. It contains connective and fat tissues, so adipose tissues, and it basically connects the skin to the surface of your muscles. So that's this here, and this like yellow bubbly looking stuff, that's your adipose or fat tissue. Oh, something kind of interesting I want to say. This is a muscle that's within your dermis. It's called your erector pili muscle. Does anybody know what that does? So it actually, when you're cold or scared or shocked, it pulls on the hair follicle, and it actually is what causes goosebumps. That's just a fun little fact. Okay, so now we're going to move on to your muscular system. So your muscular system basically gives the body the ability to move, maintain your posture. It also produces heat, and it includes all the muscles of your body. So all of the muscles of your body, if you weighed them all out, it would account for about half of your body weight, which I think is kind of cool. So think about like bodybuilders that don't have much fat and they're like all muscle. Their muscle mass is probably way, way higher than half their body weight. Okay, sorry, moving on. It also aids in organ function and blood circulation. So contraction of certain muscles help your blood actually flow through your veins and arteries. We'll talk more about that in Chapter 6, though, the circulatory system. So the structures include, there's 3 different types of muscle. You've got your cardiac muscle, which is okay, so let's rewind. Before I go into the different types of muscle, I want to explain how they're determined, how they're classified into the different types. So it's determined by the location of the muscle, the cellular characteristics, so like how the muscle is made up, and how the muscle action is controlled. So is it voluntary control or involuntary control? Meaning, do you say like, hey, I want to walk across the room and move my body? So then you get up and walk across the room. You have to consciously think to do that. Or is it like your heart where it just pumps on its own? You don't have to think every time your heart pumps. Okay, so cardiac muscle, obviously is in the wall of the heart, and it pumps blood out of the heart, so it's involuntary. You don't have to think about making your heart pump the blood through your body. So it's an involuntary source of action. And then your skeletal muscle is attached to your bones, and it produces movement. So if it's producing movement, you have to consciously think about waving your hand or standing up and going to the bathroom. That's a voluntary control. Smooth muscle is found in the wall of hollow organs. So do you have to think about digesting your food? Do you have to think about squeezing that digested food through your intestines when you're ready to get rid of it? No, that's not something that you are consciously thinking about. So that is also involuntary. So here's a picture of your muscular system. So adapted, it says over here in the blue box, adapted skeletal muscle movement helps keep blood moving through your veins. For example, moving your arms helps move blood from your fingertips back to your heart. So there are certain movements and certain muscles that help your blood actually flow. Okay. So before I go on to the next system, I forgot to mention that there are boxes for every system that I'm going to go over. There are boxes that explain or give examples of disorders of that system and the diagnostic tests used. So for the integumentary system, that is box 5-1. I don't have a page number. Let me find the page. So box 5-1 on page 124. Acne, it's an inflammatory disease of sebaceous glands and hair follicles. Dermatitis is skin inflammation. So I want you guys to review these boxes for every system, because this is really what you need to know as a phlebotomist. You need to know certain disorders and what tests are commonly performed to either diagnose or treat those disorders, because that's ultimately what you're doing. You're drawing blood for diagnostic purposes or treatment purposes of these diseases. So common tests for integumentary system would be a biopsy, like a skin biopsy or any sort of tissue biopsy. Cultures, any sort of microbiology cultures, skin scrapings, fungal cultures, tissue cultures. So those are common integumentary system tests. For your muscular system, box 5-2 on page 127, you've got atrophy as a disorder, so that's like wasting of your muscle. Muscular dystrophy, which is a genetic disease which causes atrophy. Tendinitis, which is inflammation of muscle or tendons. And then some common tests for these disorders would be an ANA, CK, lactic acid, lactate dehydrogenase, or LDH for short. So really, I want you to really, really focus on these boxes for each system, okay? Okay, now we can go on. Okay, so on page 126 is this picture of, this is a microscopic view of different the different types of muscle tissue. So let me pull this up. So your skeletal muscle is this picture right here, the top picture. And this is long and cylindrical, multinucleated, so you can see long and cylindrical. There's multiple nucleus. It's heavily striated, so these little bars or lines in it are called striations. These are muscles that attach to bones and provide movement. Okay, and then the next box down, the next box down, B is your cardiac muscle, which we said makes up like the walls of your heart. These have what they call intercalated discs. Okay, so these little things right here are considered intercalated discs, kind of separating the different cells, those little lines there. Single nuclei, so each cell only has one nucleus. It's not multinucleated like the skeletal muscle. And then it's lightly striated, but it is definitely not as aggressively striated as the skeletal muscle is. Okay, and then the bottom one is your smooth muscle, which we said lines the walls of hollow organs. So like your stomach, that'd be smooth muscle. Your intestines, those would be smooth muscle. So these have tapered ends. You can see they don't end all in the same spot. See, like the skeletal muscle is pretty columnar. These, you can't really tell where one cell ends and one begins. They're non-striated, so they have no striations. And they have long, thin nuclei. So these nuclei are long and thin. Alrighty. Now we get to move on to the skeletal system. So obviously, I'm sure we all know that the skeletal system is basically all the bones and joints in your body, but it also includes your cartilage and the ligaments that connect your bones and joints. So what purpose could we possibly have for the skeletal system as phlebotomists? Surprisingly, the skeletal system is huge for phlebotomists because the bone marrow within your bones is actually where your blood cells are made. It's a process called hemopoiesis, and that's like actually the formation of red blood cells. It's produced in your bones. So without your bones creating your red blood cells, we might not have a job because there'd be no blood in your body. So anyways, it's also the framework that gives your body your shape and support. It protects your internal organs. It provides movement and leverage in combination with the muscular system. So they kind of work together to provide movement. It stores calcium, and then, like I said, it produces your blood cells in your bone marrow. Okay. So different structures are your bones, which is a type of connective tissue. It consists of bone cells surrounded by hard deposits of calcium salts. I'm not going to go into depth, like on your exam, I'm not going to ask you like the composition of a bone, but I definitely will probably ask you a question about hemopoiesis. Anyways, so they are surrounded by hard deposits of calcium salts. They are living tissue with their own network of blood and lymph vessels and nerves. So you actually have blood cells or blood vessels, veins and arteries that go into your bones. As crazy as that sounds, it's very true. We're not going to get into depth on that, but there's 4 different shapes. You've got your flat, irregular, long, and short. Flat are like your ribs or skull. Facial would be irregular with your vertebra. Facial and vertebrae are irregular. Your femur and humerus, metacarpals, metatarsals are long bones. Short would be carpals and tarsals. So, I guess I should specify, I'm just assuming that you guys all know what these bones are. Your femur is your upper leg bone. Humerus would be your upper arm bone. Metacarpals and metatarsals would be the longer bones in your hands and feet. And then your carpals and tarsals are they're very, very small bones in your wrists and ankles. Okay. Of particular importance to us as phlebotomists would be the distal phalanx, which is your fingertip, and then your calcaneus, which is your heel bone. Why would that be? Because when you're performing capillary puncture, that's where we're going to be puncturing the skin is on the fingertips and the heel bones. We want to make sure that we're not actually hitting the bone, that we're off to the side of it, and that we're not going too deep with the lancet that we choose to use. So there are different depths that lancets will go depending on like maturity of the infant when you're doing a heel stick, or finger if you're doing an adult. Okay, so here's a picture of your human skeleton. Okay, joints, I'm sure we know that your knees and your elbows, those are considered joints. So they're any junction or union between two or more bones. So all of your knuckles are joints, your wrists, your ankles are joints. There's joints in your neck, your shoulder, your hip. There's many joints. There's different types of joints. We won't go into the different types of joints, but basically any freely movable joint has a synovial cavity, and a bursa, which is a sac filled with synovial fluid to ease movement. So bursitis would be like inflammation of that sac filled with synovial fluid. So a CSF, or a synovial fluid analysis rather, not a CSF, and an erythrocyte sedimentation rate. These would be probably ordered for any joint issues or pain. Okay, so this one, box 5.3 on page 128, that's your skeletal system disorders and tests. So arthritis, bone tumor, bursitis, gout, osteomyelitis, osteochondritis, osteoporosis. And then you've got your ionized calcium, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, rheumatoid arthritis, uric acid, serum, and 24-hour urine. Those are some common tests and disorders. Okay, now we're going to move on to your nervous system, which in my opinion is probably the most complex and confusing body system, just because it deals with your brain and hormones. Well, endocrine is more hormones, but anything dealing with the brain I just find very, very confusing, because small changes from person to person can make such a huge effect in personality and the way they perceive things. I just find it complex. I find it very interesting, but very complex. Okay, so basically, the nervous system is composed of your brain, spinal cord, and all the nerves throughout your body. It controls and coordinates activities of various body systems by electrical impulses and chemical substances, which are sent and received. There's two functional divisions: your somatic and your autonomic. Somatic is your voluntary movement, and autonomic is your involuntary movement. I want to explain this in a way that's easy to understand, because there's so many different parts of your nervous system. So the two functional divisions are your somatic and autonomic. But there's also two structural divisions: your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. So we're going to go into depth on your central nervous system first. Okay. Before we get into your central nervous system, we're going to talk about the fundamental unit of your nervous system, which is the neuron. This is basic. A neuron is basically a highly complex cell which conducts messages in the form of impulses or electrical signals. This allows the body to interact with internal and its internal and external environment. And it consists of a cell body with a nucleus and organelles, dendrites, and axons. There's a picture of it on page 129. I'm not gonna quiz you on or put a picture of a neuron on your exam and expect you to know the different structures. But I do want you to be aware that that is the fundamental unit of the nervous system. This is a neuron. Okay, so for your central nervous system, um, one second. I'm so unorganized, you guys. Being in Florida is like, this is the hardest thing to do, sit in the room and give a lecture. Okay. Your central nervous system includes your brain, which is basically the nervous system's command center. It interprets information and then determines the body's response to certain stimuli. It also includes your spinal cord. And so your spinal cord, I'll talk to you more about after I explain this next part. So every part of your body communicates with your central nervous system or brain through nerves. And a nerve is a bundle of fibers that uses electrical and chemical signals to transport sensory or motor information to and from your central nervous system. So all of those nerves that are transmitting information to and from your central nervous system branch out from the spinal cord. So they all connect, all the nerves connect in one location in the spinal cord. And that leads to your brain. Okay? So your spinal cord is surrounded by a cavity enclosed by connective tissue, also known as meninges. And this cavity is filled with cerebral spinal fluid. So the cavity that's the surrounding of connective tissue and the cerebral spinal fluid are designed to cushion and protect the nerves within the spinal cord. Okay, does that all make sense? So your central nervous system is basically like your brain and spinal cord. Your spinal cord is like a trunk almost, where all of the nerves, the outlying nerves, come together and lead to your brain. Or from your brain, I guess. Signals can go to and from your brain through the spinal cord out to the nerves. So your peripheral nervous system is all of those nerves that connect the central nervous system or the spinal cord with other parts of the body. So all those nerves that branch out from the spinal cord, those are all your peripheral nervous system. There are two main types of nerves within your peripheral nervous system, and those are your motor or efferent nerves, which carry impulses from the central nervous system to organs, glands, and muscles. So, for example, when you're driving, your motor neurons take the message from your central nervous system in your brain to your hands, telling you to turn the wheel when you need to round a corner. And then the second type is your sensory or afferent nerves, which carry impulses to your central nervous system from sensory receptors in various parts of the body. So, an example of this would be your sense of taste, smell, hot or cold, pain. So it basically takes information from your skin or muscles or bones, etc., back to the central nervous system for processing. So, ouch, that's painful, that's hot, ouch. That would be a sensory or afferent nerve. I hope this all makes sense, because I know it is a very confusing, and there's a lot of information in this chapter, and it's more broad, and I know I'm going more in depth than your book might, but I feel like it's important in order for you to fully grasp and understand this material. Okay. Moving on to the endocrine system. Oh, so here's your neuron, and then this is a picture of your spinal cord and your brain. So your brain and your spinal cord, this is your central nervous system, and then all of these nerves coming out of your spinal cord and going to the different parts of your body are your peripheral nervous system. Okay, so your endocrine system, it's basically composed of glands that release hormones which help regulate the metabolic activity of your body. So your endocrine glands secrete hormones directly into your bloodstream, and these hormones are basically chemicals or substances that affect many different processes in your body, including your metabolism, growth and development, reproduction, personality, response to stress, resistance to disease. So this is another confusing system that can change can change so many aspects of you depending on how much of the hormone is released. If you're not really releasing enough, if you're releasing too much of the hormone, is your body just not producing the hormone? So there's so many different variables within the system that can change a person so much. Okay. So these are different structures. These are all endocrine glands within your endocrine system. Table 5.7 on page 132. This is a great chart. It gives you the type of gland, the location of the gland, the hormone it releases, and then the function of that hormone in the body. So I'll give a couple examples. Your pituitary gland, this is like the brain. It's pretty important. The hormone it releases is your adrenocorticotropic, also known as ACTH. It also releases ADH, follicle stimulating hormone, growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. So then on the side it gives you the principal function of each of these hormones. Decreases urine production, stimulates the development of the ova and sperm for secretion of reproductive organs, regulates growth, controls thyroid activity. So this is a really great chart if you want to get more into depth on the different endocrine glands and what hormone they release and what function those hormones provide. And then box 5.5 on page 134. So once you kind of get a good grasp on your endocrine glands, the hormones they release and all that stuff, you can go to box 5.5 and you'll see this box is huge. There are so many different disorders and tests used for endocrine system disorders. Some common tests, I won't list disorders just because there's so many, but some common tests would be ACTH, your thyroid function studies. Those are huge. Like, I would highlight those. Those will definitely be on your exams. T3, T4, TSH, those are all thyroid function studies. Glucose tolerance test, cortisol. So look over this box. I know it seems like a lot of information, but like I said, these boxes of your disorders and diagnostic tests are going to be the most important for you as a phlebotomist. Okay, going on. So there are some other structures with endocrine functions. Your heart ventricles secrete B-type natriuretic peptide, or BNP. This is important because it releases this BNP enzyme or hormone in response to volume expansion and pressure overload within your heart ventricles. So a BNP blood test is often performed to determine if a patient is having congestive heart failure. So if they come in with chest pains, you might want to grab a light green or PST for a BNP test. Granted, when they come into the ER, you're going to draw a rainbow anyways, which we'll talk about later what a rainbow is. So you'll get that light green top or PST tube anyways, but it's important that you know that could possibly be ordered on a patient with chest pains or heart-related symptoms. Okay, your kidneys secrete erythropoietin or EPO to stimulate red blood cell production. We'll talk about that more when we get to the urinary system. And your stomach lining secretes a hormone to stimulate digestion. Your placenta secretes a hormone that functions during pregnancy. So there's many different structures with endocrine type functions. And then here's a picture of all the different types of endocrine glands. So you can relate this back to your chart on page 132 so you can see the location of the different glands that secrete certain hormones. All right, my favorite system, the digestive system. I'm just kidding. I just like it because I like food. So basically your digestive system, takes in food, it breaks it down, and then it eliminates it. Eliminates the waste products of the food. So it takes the food in, it uses the parts of the food that it needs for energy and whatever else, and then it eliminates what it doesn't need. So the different structures are the GI tract, your mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestines. And then there's what we call accessory organs, which just like help in the process. And those are your lips, teeth, tongue, salivary glands, liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. I feel like the book doesn't go into much depth on your digestive or reproductive systems, so we're kind of going to fly through these. But page 135, box 5-6, these are the examples of your digestive system disorders and diagnostic tests. Appendicitis, cholecystitis, diverticulosis, gastritis, those are all digestive system disorders. And then common tests would be a C-urea breath test. You're definitely going to do this. We'll talk about the breath test. It's not a blood draw. And then you've got your fecal fat, gastric analysis, occult blood, ova and parasites. So a lot of these tests are like stool samples. Your glucose tolerance test, complete blood count, bilirubin. So again, look at this box. Look at these boxes. And here's a picture. All right. So moving on to the next, reproductive. Like I said, your book doesn't go into much depth about this, so I really want you to focus on your box 5-7 on page 137, examples of reproductive system disorders and diagnostic tests. Basically any sexually transmitted disease obviously is going to be a reproductive system disorder. But anyways, the functions of your reproductive system are to produce gametes or sex cells, which are needed to form a new human being. Spermatozoa are the gametes in males, and your ova are your gametes in females. The structures would be in females, ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, vagina, vulva. In males, it would be testes, seminal vesicles, prostate, epididymis, vas deferens, seminal ducts, blah, 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 blah. I think we all know about the reproductive system. All I want you to know really is the box 5-7. Just study that box and you'll be fine. All right, on to the urinary system. So the urinary system tests and disorders is on page 138, box 5-8. So look that over. Okay, so your urinary system is composed of all the organs involved in producing, collecting, or eliminating urine. It filters waste products from the blood. So we'll talk about what structure aids in the filtering of your blood. I feel like a lot of people don't know or don't realize that your urine is actually the waste within your blood. It has nothing to do with the food you eat. When the food you eat is the waste that goes through your digestive system, your blood wastes are through your urinary system. Okay, so it eliminates waste from the body and urine. It helps regulate bodily fluids, blah, blah, blah. So the structures that it includes is your kidneys, which contain nephrons, and a nephron is this is what filters your blood are the nephrons within each kidney, and there's millions within each kidney. So these help filter the blood. And then your ureters transport the urine from the kidney to the bladder. Your urinary bladder then stores the urine, and your urethra then transports the urine from the bladder outside the body. So, I mean, it kind of all makes sense. Your kidneys also, I would like to say that they help maintain water and electrolyte balance in addition to eliminating urea. And then they also produce EPO, which we talked about earlier. This is a hormone that stimulates the production of red blood cells. It also produces an enzyme called renin, and this plays a role in regulating your blood pressure. So if you have kidney failure, sometimes your blood pressure can get all out of whack. So here's a picture. So I'm going to read the blue box like I normally do. Your blood creatinine is a measure of kidney function because creatinine is a waste product removed from the body by the kidneys. If kidney function declines, creatinine accumulates in the blood. So a creatinine test can help determine if you've got a kidney infection or you're having kidney failure. So creatinine is often a test used for that. As you can see in box 5.8, creatinine is in, I think, 3 or 4 of the tests listed. So your creatinine clearance, creatinine serum, creatinine 24-hour urine, those are all testing for kidney problems. Alrighty, your respiratory system. On page 141, table 5.8, this is a great chart explaining major structures of the respiratory tract, their function, and the flow of air to the lungs. So definitely look these over. It goes into depth on your nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, lungs, bronchi, etc., etc. So I'll go over. The nose provides the main airway for respiration. It warms, moistens, and filters the air. It provides a resonance chamber for the voice. So your nose actually has a lot to do with the sound of your voice. And it contains receptors for the sense of smell. So that's just one example. I wanted to be on this slide instead of the last one, sorry. Your pharynx is a funnel-shaped passageway. It receives food from the mouth and delivers it to the esophagus. It also receives air from the nose and carries it to the larynx. Your larynx is the upper end of your trachea. It houses the vocal cords. And I want to go back to this now. I'm not gonna, if I put a question on your exam about external and internal respiration, it will be a extra credit question. But external respiration is when oxygen from air enters the bloodstream in the lungs, and then carbon dioxide leaves the bloodstream and enters air from the lungs. Internal would be when oxygen leaves the bloodstream and enters the cells and tissues, and carbon dioxide from the cells enters the bloodstream. So, if we think about how the blood flows through your body, your arteries are taking oxygenated blood away from the heart to your tissues. So, that would be considered, once it gets to the tissues, internal, as the oxygen is going from the bloodstream into the cells to feed the cells and tissues. And then the carbon dioxide enters the blood again. So then that deoxygenated blood from the tissues comes up from the veins back to the heart and into the lungs, where it's reoxygenated as external respiration. I know it's confusing. There's a really cool picture on page 140 that may explain it better than I did. Yeah, so it shows gas exchange. Okay, here's a picture of your respiratory system. Oh, there's a picture of the gas exchange. Okay, so blue indicates your veins. So deoxygenated blood goes into the lungs and it picks up oxygen, and then this oxygenated blood goes back through the heart and out to your body. So once it gets out to the body, the cells pick up that oxygen and give the carbon dioxide back to the blood vessels, and they carry the deoxygenated blood through the veins back to the heart. So arteries, veins, and the cycle just continues, which we'll go again through this in more depth with the circulatory system. Okay, so I definitely suggest going through all of those boxes with examples of your disorders and diagnostic tests and really looking those over. Like I said, I know that this chapter is long and I know that there's a lot of information and it might be a little bit hard to understand with the lack of depth that it goes into. This chapter tries to cram 2 separate classes, like full semester length classes, into one little chapter. So the most important parts of these would be those boxes for us as phlebotomists to understand. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to text me or email me. And stay tuned for Chapter 6 presentation.